Hello, everybody. In typical fashion, I'm recording this at 1 o'clock in the morning, like most of our sessions that we've done prior in this series have run to. But, unfortunately, if you're reading the title and obviously seeing the new background, the series is coming to a quaint end. Now, this might seem a bit abrupt from, the few months, I think it's been, what has it been, 3 month gap in between the recordings, but yeah, no, just with stress, work, and just generally everybody's availability, we haven't been able to get together and put on the sound ending we've been wanting to. And we could have waited another 3 months for everything to get worked out, but that's too long to keep anyone waiting for the ending of a story. And trust me, and this is ever going to make it as a show, we're not going to be able to do that. So, it is I, Lokifer, or Luke in the campaign, who is the main voice of Lieutenant Paul Morrison and a few other side characters throughout the Australian bits. But, yeah, today we're going to be telling the finale of Gundam, A Forgotten Past, 0082. So, where we last left off, the crew was on Luna, and they were split into two different groups, one chasing down a group of three Xeon spies who'd broken in and stolen the information for the Gundam's mobile suit, and the other group who was doing basic training for their suits. We start off by going with the original three men chasing down the Xeon assailants, being Alexei Stukov, Duff Kelly, and, unknowingly at the time, Paul Morrison. So where we left off, Alexei had gotten a map and deciphered out the path in which the three men would be taking to best get to the hangar, and decided to head them off with Duff, him taking the pistol, and Duff continuing to have the tablet. They've gotten into position at a corridor in which the three men would have to pass through in order to get to the bay doors, and sure enough, in no time the three men come barreling down the hall. A few pop shots are fired off by Alexei, startling the men without initially hitting them, sending them into a wild panic and fleeing behind any object that they can. A gunfight pursues between the two and three men for about a minute, back and forth, no one hitting anyone, and generally causing a large commotion, until running noises can be heard from coming down the hall. Paul Morrison is then seen behind them as he's aimlessly been roaming the back rooms, attempting to find his way back to the ship with the food that he's purchased from the market. However, now, he's found himself in the middle of a fist fight. And by fist fight, I mean he instigated it. He runs up upon the three men and throws a wild haymaker, knocking out the taller, skinnier of the three, causing the other two to now turn their attention to him, judging that he's already taken out one of their men. This then sends Duff Kelly in as a counter, and the two men begin wailing on the other two, making a full-on Irish bar scene. However, as this happens, the first man comes back to consciousness, grabs the now discarded data device, and begins making his way to the bay, leaving the other two to battle Paul and Duff. However, Alexei, who's currently radioing in to Luna's security that they've apprehended the three, notices the man get past him, draws the pistol, and shoots him in the back, dead. This causes the other two men to cease fighting and to get into custody with ease without... Sorry, yet again, this is 1 a.m., so there are going to be a couple hiccups here. However, the more stout of the two men who are left decides to give a warning message as one final jab at the three, is that if they are not met, or if they are not in the hangar in 5 minutes, that a group of Crow Squadron forces will burst out and attack the base, judging by the fact that their mission has failed. This alarms the men, knowing that this is very a large possibility. So the three rush back to the ship, and in a cinematic scene, we see them run past a windowed corridor, where we see the... how many ships is it? 5, yes. The 5 ships, unarmed due to the training and the rules upon Luna's base, making their way over to the bay to see what commotion or distress call was called. Upon arrival, they see a cargo ship, and a couple of the dock officers attempting to get in contact with the main captain of said cargo liner. Now, this does not seem very off, and the team is very off guard from it. However, in 2 minutes of standing around, the seals on some of the freight cargo blow open, revealing 8 different mobile suits, all wearing the Crow insignia. 4 Zaku 1s and 4 Zaku 2s. Now, 2 of the Zaku 2s break off and begin attacking the bay, other ships, civilians, workers, the whole 9 yards, as the other 6 decide to target the unarmed battalion. Within quick thinking, Mason Hartford, aka Dipper, decides to have both him and a car. Have him and Slade hand off their shields to both of the 2 men, both Arrow and Zip-Tie, who will be more of a wall to oncoming shrapnel and fire from the enemies. And 3 of fuck, I'm messing this up because it's 1 in the morning. Apologies to anyone who's actually trying to listen to this continuously and professionally. The 3 remaining standard GM suits, being Slade, Tessa, and Mason, gather behind the 2 men who are now armed with 4 shields, as the 2 cannon units, being both Takumi and Akar, fall back and start priming their shoulder-mounted guns, which could not have been unarmed due to the design factor of them. Now with this, they open fire, but the 6 suits do dodge the 4 beams that fly from them from the cannons. And they are, however, the beams meet their target by shooting the 2 units that have been terrorizing the bay, bringing to a halt the terrorist acts that the Crow Squadron is bringing on, but only leaving the now more abundant force who's upon them immediately. When they become in range, the 3 suits that aren't holding shield, Tessa, Slade, and Mason, break out in all directions but up from behind the wall, and take out 3 of the suits instantaneously within a surprise maneuver. Now this sends the other 3 into a wild panic while still targeting some of the 2. So Tessa is engaged in a firefight with the other one, as Slade is now battling Heat Hawk to Beam Saber with 1. Mason must decide quickly, and he chooses to assist with Tessa in her engagement, and sends both Zip-Tie and Arrow over to assist with Slade. Now these 2, with their assistment, they have dropped their main weapons, which wouldn't have done anything for them, and they have 2 shields. And so they pinch the Zaku 2 fighting Slade, and they compress him in between all 4 shields for Slade to easily stab and end up killing, bringing it down to 2 suits remaining. Now, with Tessa, Mason comes up and he makes a quick slash maneuver at him, but he does dodge and pulls out a Heat Hawk, and now he is engaged in a melee fight with this Zaku 1. Now this does carry on for a bit until Mason draws the second saber and stabs him afterwards, now armed with 2 blades. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, Luke, this now sounds like there's been 7 suits killed. What happened to lucky number 8? Well, lucky number 8 has seemingly got away. Most people would label him with the coward card. We will call him Cowardly Zaku 1. Because he escapes. He's flying out into space. Takumi is tracking him with his cannons, but he's not comfortable at the range. And everyone, they gather themselves. They've been a little beaten up. Dipper has a few slash marks from his thing, same as Slade, between their sword battles. But everyone's mostly relieved that they've dealt with the main brunt of the force. But no one really has ranged or firepower when it would come to a fight. And this would prove as a problem, because while Takumi has been tracking the fleeing Zaku 1, he notices a fleet size of about 24 oncoming Zeon units, ranging the whole amount from both Zaku variants to Rickdoms in general, and most of which all bear the same insignia of the crow. Now, the entire team, basically their hearts drop to the bottom of their stomach because they feel that this is going to be their Alamo. Their line in the sand. They will die protecting the moon from this fleet, and they get back into formation behind the shields, and the cannons are directly behind, and they're ready to make their final stand. Everyone's doing their final prayers. Mason pulls back out the picture of Grandpa Hart and puts it down. Slade mumbles something to himself about going and seeing Whisper again shortly, and so on and so forth. But, as everyone begins to open fire, well, by everyone I mean both Akar and Takumi, you can see the attention of the oncoming Crow fleet divert to an object to the left as two large beams fire off from the right direction of the group, who then look over and see the oncoming Stone Waverin with both the sniper of Stukov and the rifle of Gundam pilot Duff Kelly mounted on top of the suits are on top of the ship as they're rounding the corner. And with the open bay is Paul Morrison in his suit with actual arms to give to the people. The ship pulls into position and opens fire with its own battery as the snipers continuously pick off the fleet, which has now been scrambled as they're diving behind debris, meteors, anything in the field, just so that, they don't get picked off as easy. And as this is going on, Morrison provides the group of 5 with armaments. Well, it wouldn't be 5 at this point. It would be 7. He provides the 7 with their armaments, their guns, and the whole 9 yards, and joins them as the ship then turns towards the fleet and begins to push them further into the debris field. Now, this seems like an up, because everyone is armed, they're going through, they're fighting, they're picking off solo or paired units up, they're working as teams, pincer maneuvers, very cinematic. This scene would pretty much be something similar to what we see in the middle of 2015's Gundam Thunderbolt, where there's a lot of broken ships, like suits everywhere, there's shots coming through holes and around corners, a lot of dodging, a lot of weaving, stuff like that, but with the main Stone Waverin acting as a backwards icebreaker, pushing through, blowing up large debris, and mainly just leaving a whole wake behind it. Now, when they push even further in, they feel like they've dealt with all the suits. At least 30 had been dealt with at this point. Each pilot has a fair amount of kills on their hand. Few damage from both getting hit by debris or shots, but nothing too substantial at this moment in time. Now, as we can see, things have been looking very well for this group, who's notoriously had a less than perfect track record when it's come to space. This is when everything goes, well, best way to put it is silent. There's no suits, there's no firing. The Stone Waverin is still pushing in. The pilots are still on its sides, front and bottom, they're still pushing in with it, but there's no enemies. They can't see anyone. It's oddly quiet. Until the distinct sounds of more Musai and what's the big ones called? We'll come to them. They're the big suits. They fought one of them on the Cook Islands. Those big guys. They'll come to me eventually. But all the fancier typed suits, rather than the grunts, start coming in, and they're blowing up debris. They're taking shots on the ship. Tessa has the legs blown off of her suit, is immobilized that way, but is not killed. Fortunately, she was close enough to the ship that she was able to be recovered, and the pilot was safe. Same thing happens to both Zip Tie and Arrow, but they get their arms blown off and eject from their suits back onto the ship, leaving them to, explode as they have, or in tradition. And with this now happening, Arlo decides to make the decision to abandon the field and makes a hard cut to the left, out through more of the field to try to get into open space towards Earth. Now, this works. He's taking a lot of damage from debris on the ship. The remaining members of Team 2 and Slade are picking people off left and right, getting the ship, and right as they're seeing open space, they're in the clear of the debris. One of the big, yet again, goofs, that's their name. A giant black and yellow goof shows up with just the crow insignia on its left side and like a crow-like paint job on the front, like on its face kind of thing. Like they took a Zaku one's head and put it on the body of a goof. So, a hybrid suit kind of thing. And he claims to be the head chief of the Crow Squadron, the big man. Yet again, his name escapes me. We'll get into these finer details when I make the end-all video, the summary of the entire thing with all the information, a nice slideshow. Trust me, you'll love it. It'll perfectly sum up this entire series for most people in less time, because I've crunched the math, and not including this video coming out, this entire series has about 2 days worth of audio, and I doubt anyone's going to try to listen to that in one sitting. If you do, I applaud you, congratulations. But let's be realistic, no one's going to do that. So, he comes out, and in traditional fashion, draws up his gun, his blaster, and he's pointing it at the bridge of the Stone Wyvern, who automatically, everyone's freaking out. They're trying to get out of there. Arlo, calm and collected, orders all of the men out of the bridge, except for him and Mark, who is the main guy. He pilots the thruster. He tells them to put it in full bore and then to run. And they do. This whole time, he's been giving a monologue about how much trouble they've caused them on Earth and how the Federation, typical Xeon stuff, the Federation are assholes, they should be free and everything, they won't stand for this tyranny anymore, this oppression of space noise bullshit, and he pulls the trigger right as Arlo and Mark get out the door. But this blows up the bridge of the Stone Wyvern, and the blast echoes through the halls. Arlo is severely injured. There's a lot of bridge mates, everybody who are just floating around. It's a terrible scene. But Arlo did not die there. He's passed out, he's in a coma, but he is not dead. And with this, he feels he's gone on and begins to fly back with his men. Obviously, a few pop shots are taken by both Takumi and Akar, who are shot in their cannons with precision from this guy, showing that he is a professional, rendering their main guns useless, and they fall back with the ship and help bring it to a stop once it's out of the field, or out of the field of debris. And this leaves... Well, Stukov is also still with the ship since he's sniping, and Slade is back dealing with his men. So this leaves the 3 remaining members of Team 2 out holding the line, which are Mason, Paul, and Duff. Now, Paul is more within the field, slashing, shooting with his shotgun. Duff and Mason are picking people off from just outside the field. Now, Morrison, who's just stabbed through, is now being pursued by 3 enemy suits and brings them out of the field. And this leaves them open to be shot by the 2 remaining men out there. Now, Mason, who is currently within a rifle duel with another man, takes his attention off to deal with those 2, and then gets his suit severely shot just near the core. He ejects out into space, and right before his suit explodes, Duff picks it up and throws it towards the cluster of people, and his suit explodes upon them, leading to a chain reaction of the already damaged Xeon mobile suits. Now, most of it's gone silent. Morrison recovers Mason, and him and Duff go back to the ship. There are very few suits remaining. Stukov's, Slade's, Duff's, Mason are the ones, or not Mason, Morrison, are the only ones that are practically untouched from the mission. They have dents, scrapes, debris, but they're still functional for it. And the ones who are completely out of it are Tessa, Ty, and Tessa, Ty, and Wesley? West? West. Yeah, his name has West in it somewhere. Well, West Carlton. Yep, that was his name, West Carlton. There we go. Ty, West, Tessa are out of it, and both Takumi and Akar are badly damaged. So, obviously, the scene when they get back to the ship, very poor. A lot of the crew is in disarray. They're attempting to fix things. They're hauling people around like crazy. And then, obviously, within this time, the pilots all meet up in the center of the hangar, and people are contemplating. Both Ty and Wes are looking at each other, like friends, like, holy shit, how did we just survive this? Tessa is just kind of quietly mumbling off to herself, just trying to figure out what the next move's going to be or what the opponent's next moves are, and so on and so forth. But most of Team 2 is all gathered around, and they're looking at each other, like, what's our next move? And as this happens, we see Arlo being carted off on a stretcher to the medical ward to seek treatment for his injuries. And at that moment, both Slade and Morrison look at each other, being that one of them now is the highest commanding officer of the ship, being the lieutenants. Now, not sure how this is, if that actually is how it works, but that's pretty much how this scenario comes down to. So, Slade, being rather inexperienced and not being the man who wants to come up with the plan, leaves this to Morrison, who takes a moment to think to himself, and he walks off. Duff attempts to follow him at this point, but Morrison tells him to stay with the guys and try to keep morale high. As this happens, he walks over to Raleigh, who's stressing out, and we don't directly see this. This is similar to how both Arlo and Whisper operated at the beginning over the secrecy of the Gundam mobile suit. And we hear Raleigh get pissed, Morrison mumble some words of comfort or, hey, we have something serious to talk about now. And then they walk off and talk about a conversation. Obviously, the men, they don't know what to do. Slade decides to tell a war story about the 1-year war out in space and the graveyard and all that stuff. Talking about Char and Gato and all the men that he'd lost, but all the men he'd fought with, and how that if they made it through something like that, then we can make it through something like this. And generally, this helps to inspire most of the people who are there. Then we see Morrison and Raleigh return, and they've been discussing a few things. Well, shit, I forgot one crucial fact. Before all of this, while the pilots were still grouped and everyone was still freaking out, and they'd just seen Arlo, a communication from the head guy of the Crow Squadron comes across to everybody from back on his main ship. And he's giving another iteration of his thing. He says that it brings him nothing but joy seeing this pain in his side be reduced to nothing but a floating satellite of immobile and disarray, of hopelessness and disarray. And that if he doesn't get a response back, or, well, he's giving them 2 hours, pretty much. He's giving them 2 hours to collect themselves, get everything ready, and then he'll come over and accept hostages, bring people in, stuff like that, and take them to be a part of the Xeon, or if they refuse, they will be seen all as hostile, including the crew and any personnel on board, and they will be shot on sight. Now, with that out of the way, Morrison went off to talk to Raleigh. Sorry about that, I just got sent an email about something I'm doing. Well, he returns, and he gathers all the men in the remains of the ready room of what it was, and he stands in front of everybody and claims he has a plan. A few people murmur to themselves, but for the most part, everyone has fallen quiet. And Morrison utters the lines, "We are going to abandon ship." And most people at this time don't really understand, but they can come to the consensus that this is probably going to be best bet with all the mechanics and everybody on board still, and all the injured. So, how the plan goes, as Morrison describes, is that the pilots without suits will be in charge of piloting and operating the main escape vessel that will house the crew and most important technologies from the ship. Now, the remaining operational suits will run an escort mission upon this. And they have an hour 30 to get everything prepared and launched for this to happen. And they're all going to be working at it, getting their suits prepared, getting everybody in, settled, and prepped. And that there's really no time to argue, and that this is the final say-all, or do-all, say-all kind of thing. And people look around at him, and kind of in a confused way, and obviously this is a confusing time, Morrison thinks to himself, or he thinks and then says, "I know this is not how we typically do things, but for the betterment of everybody, this is how it has to happen." Now, obviously, everyone just kind of nods and goes off and start doing their prep, except for Mason, who sticks around, and he's trying to apologize about losing the suit and everything. Morrison puts his hand on his shoulder and says, "It's fine. I'm going to let you pilot my suit for this escort." So he's going to have the shotgun, the Heat Hawk, and everything, and he's going to be running point for them. And so, with that, Mason nods and goes over to Morrison's suit to start making prep. He doesn't question why Morrison isn't. Well, he does at first, but Morrison said he's going to be the one piloting the escape vessel, which isn't true. It's actually going to be piloted by Tessa and manned by both. Manned by both Wes and Ty. So when this is brought to their attention, they go to the main vessel and start making preparations for both fuel and coursing back to Luna. The crew is informed of this and now breaks away to go, start loading the injured, loading the crew into the escape pod, while both Raleigh and Morrison vanish from the picture. We see a brief montage of everybody getting everything loaded, then getting launched off the ship, while doing a head count and everything. Now, the person in charge of the head count is a mechanic rather than any of the crew. So, obviously, 3 names are left off the list, mainly being Raleigh, Paul, and another unnamed mechanic. And while this is going on, we get to see a little bit as to what was happening with those 3 outside the montage. We get a brief look down to the engine room, where we see Paul Morrison and Raleigh both working on the engines, transforming them, rather than traditional propulsion thrusters, into EMP devices. And we see the unnamed mechanic converting the 2, what would you call them? The 2 space fighters into solely mechanical-based operations. So none of the guns would work, none of the fancy radar tracking. It's just pure thrusters and flaps at this point. And, well, obviously flaps don't work, but the little thrusters that go psh, they have mechanical launches, so they wouldn't be affected for numerous reasons. So The escape pod leaves. It has both Stukov and Slade as its sides, with a car and Takumi behind it, with point of both Duff and Mason. And they start making their way back to Luna, leaving the ship alone with essentially three men, or as they think, just a floating ball of a ship that no one's going to reply to. Now, after 30 minutes, everything's gone smooth for them. A brief transmission comes across from the headman of the Crow Squadron. And as we see this happening, we see both Raleigh and Morrison standing in the bay looking out into space. And we can see his main suit and a plethora of other Goofs, Rick Dom, Zaku 2s, Zaku 1s, pretty much making a half moon around the ship, looking at it. And he's giving his final decree as to what will it be. Will we siege you, or will you come willingly as hostages? And Morrison decides to reply and instigate with a witty comment. Yet again, most of this will be brought up in writing, but essentially, it's, fuck you, we'll do what we want, and you'll never take us alive. So he's basically going with the siege option. And we can see, in addition to both him and Raleigh's normal suits, they're wearing vests they'd gotten from the armory. Morrison with his traditional pistol, and Raleigh who's armed himself with one from the rack. When this happens, both men, well, not both, Raleigh and the mechanic hop into one of the ships as the oncoming suits begin to enclose the ship and open fire at random holes. Now, as soon as they get within a certain range, Morrison pulls out the detonator and just presses it, and we see an explosion come from the engine bay, a physical explosion, and then the electrical magnetic pulse shoot out and short circuit most to all of the grunt ships, besides the main guy and the two higher-ups who were next to him. And we see all of them go limp, same as the Waverin, and gravity begins to pull the ship in towards Earth's orbit. As this happens, through one of the catapults, we see a single starfighter shoot out and make its way. This is the one that is manned by Raleigh and his mechanic. Now, in a final effort, however, some mechanical issues have happened with the one armed for Paul and the catapult system, so it takes them a little bit more time to get it armed. And as this is happening, the ship just now begins to enter Earth's orbit. You start seeing suits burning up, a fireball starts coming up around the ship to the catapult, and Morrison's plane fires out. But you can see no lights are flashing because all the electronics are fried on the ship, but you can see that there's problems. It's already burning, it's getting pulled into the Earth's orbit, and he's given it all it got. He's pushing the throttle down, opening everything up. He's cranked it up not to 11, but to 13 at this point. Just fighting for it, screaming, and when this happens, it cuts back out. We don't get to see if he escapes or not, but we get to see from both Duff and Mason's point of view, the ship just engulf in a giant ball of flames as it starts falling down towards Earth, and the explosion from their point of view. None of them knew this was happening, and they start trying to account for anybody, and one of the pilots finally looks at the list and sees the three men who were not included. And everyone's reaction is just kind of like, fuck, man, what just happened? This wasn't the plan, but it was the plan. It was always the plan. And obviously, you know, this has happened. They're looking like, did these guys just commit suicide? Then, obviously not. The main guy looks over, sees the blip, and they're like, there they are. Second group, go get them. And the main five who were, you know, defending the convoy now get to defend the convoy. And they fight off a few smaller waves of suits, but the shuttle and the men all make it back to Luna safe and sound. And everyone gets out. Everyone's exhausted mentally and physically, and they're just kind of sitting there. The Federation doesn't really know what to do, because now, in this course of 2 days, they're down 2 ships, multiple men a captain now who's incapacitated and being rushed off to Luna's ER, and a bunch of displaced crew members and pilots. And so, pretty much thankful to be alive, the crew go out into the city. They get tended to, pretty much hospital stay up until the Federation reassigns them to go places. They're happy, but the pilots all kind of meet up, and they're just kind of sat around like, holy shit, guys. Paul's dead, because they saw Raleigh come back. Raleigh rejoined up with the group and everything, landed with them, and him and his mechanic are fine. But no one could account for Paul. And so everyone's just at this point thinking, oh, he's dead. He didn't make it, kind of thing. You know, sadness. Everyone's just kind of like, oh, he's a cool guy. Now you have these stories, those stories, yada, yada, yada. And then pretty much someone brings up, well, at least he died to get us safely here, and all that stuff. And that's what he would have wanted. And at this point, everyone just kind of nods, and they're like, well, what's the next step? And rationally, or, well, being one of the rational ones, Tessa stands up and says, the next step is nothing. We don't have a ship. We don't have official teams anymore. We're going to be redeployed with different groups and different sections. Forget this entirely happened and stuff like that. And go on with our way. And Slade nods, and both Wes and Tyler do as well. And, you know, Akar and Duff just kind of look down. Stukov is looking out a window, pissed as hell, mumbling to himself about how he wanted to be the one to destroy that dastardly ship and stuff like that, and all that fun shit. But no, that's not going to happen. And just Softboy Mason has had enough of this, and he's like, no, we're not going to sit down, because that's not what he would have done. Sure, he'd given his life so that we can survive, but we had a cause for coming out here to space, and it was making sure that they don't, you know, destroy Earth. Because that's kind of their plan. It's like, yeah, the original Xeon was independence. These fuckers just want carnage. And at this point, he's pissed because he's lost a lot of friends, a lot of time, and stuff like this to this fight that he wants to see it through to the end. And obviously, most of Team 2, well, not most, all remaining Team 2 just kind of nod like, yeah. And so he begins banding together a little suicide squad, if I may, and like going out on a suicide mission kind of thing. And most of Team 1 is like, nah, do we want to? No. But then West looks at himself and he's like, that man saved my life on now 2 occasions. So I don't really got too much else. He's looking around, he's like, yeah, I'll join. This brings along Zip Tie as well. And Tessa's like, y'all are crazy. This is against the books. I'm not joining you, but you're my friend, so if you do it, I'm not going to report you. And Slade's kind of the same way. And so everyone looks at each other and they're like, all right, we're going to do it. We're going to do it. And so they take their remaining ship, or the suits. So obviously, Duff using his Gundam, Mason using Paul's suit, both Akar and, well, it's just Akar at this point. Takumi's just like, man, I just got thrown into one of these things. I don't know what the hell's happening. I want to go cool off. And so he left with his other mechanic buddies. Akar suits up. Stukov gets in his suit. But, you know, they've repaired Akar's suit. I didn't go into that part. And both Wes and Tyler grab 2 suits from the current bay. And they head out into the squad. But obviously, you know, we're going to get some kind of a Rogue One scene because the Federation are going to be like, hey, you suits, what are y'all going out doing? And Duff is going to reply something along the lines of just the word training. And they're going to be like, oh yeah, well, what's your call sign? And they're going to revert back, and they're going to call themselves Badger 1, Badger 2, and so on. They're bringing back the Badger name. They're cutting off the old one. They're just going back with the original group. And so they head out into space, because obviously they know this fleet, they were able to get a lot of people coming in and out of that field. There's a lot of the group concentrated there. And most of the people are like, or most of the team's like, well, they're out there somewhere. So stealthily, you see them hiding around debris, going around until they find the main ship and a bunch of little like unit bases set out where they have like cannons, little suit repairs, little maintenance bays, all that stuff. Typical like Xeon debris filled base kind of stuff, with the main ship in the middle being where all the goofs and the commanders are for them and everything. And so slowly they pick off a few of the outside unit maintenance bays, some of the cannons that they have mounted everywhere. But word gets out that they're under attack. Now, this does not suit or sit well with most of the units out in space, and so they begin to go haywire, and they're flying everywhere looking for any sign of a Federation suits and stuff like that. Well, they're finding them, and, well, obviously, at this point, since it's the beginning of it, the boys are still picking them off from the shadows and stuff like that, but most of the debris gets blown up by cannons, and they're pretty much scattered to the wind. And to create a diversion, both Wes and Tyler decide to loop around further to draw a bunch of fire, and they go out, and this leaves time for Team 2, or the remaining of Team 2, to head in towards the ship. And they start getting there, and there's heavy defenses. They've taken damage, they've taken blows, but mainly to Stukov, who before he got in there, he'd been sniping, picking off Rickdoms, Goofs, a lot of the higher tier suits out in space. But he did take a cannon blast to the gun and the legs, and it's generally not looking good for him. There's a large blockade put up in front of the ship with its engines and everything, and you can see he's on his last legs. And pretty much at this point, he looks at the team, who Mason, he's using a rifle, but he still has the shotgun mounted on his back, that little magnet strip. But he's picking off, and he looks over at Stukov, who's just kind of sitting there. But both of them, obviously, we've seen Dipper have some new type moments, and he just sits there, and you just hear the line, "Don't do it," out of Mason. And Stukov just looks at him and says, "You are the closest thing that I've considered to a friend. Goodbye, idiots." And he full thrusts towards the doors and the engine of the enemy Xeon ship, and his suit, its core, it overheats, starts bubbling out in different directions, and just goes full catatonic, explodes, shit's flying everywhere. Like, the door is wide open, half of the engines are down for the ship, so it's practically immobile. The suits and guns and everything are just destroyed and haywiring in. So basically, he's made an opening for the ship and everything. And so the team moves in there, and at this point we can see Wes and Tyler duking it out, battling, taking a few shots here and there, trading positions, trading blows kind of things. And then we see we see Tyler get shot. He loses most of his left arm in the top part, head damage kind of stuff. And Wes begins trying to, drag him through space away, taking fire, returning fire, but he is also, immobilized. He gets shot, his arms are all down. But their suits don't explode. You just see, like, the eyes flicker and then just turn off, and they're just kind of floating out in space, just getting shot. Don't really know if they're dead or not. Unfortunately, in this case, I can tell you, neither of them survived, but, they died tag teaming it up out in space, kind of stuff like that, and they took out a good number of people. So this is one Zip Tie can chalk up to being a suit that he himself did not destroy. And I guess his Xeon armor killing finally came into good use when it came to space fights. But Akar and Duff take up positions at the old defenses and are firing out at the oncoming suits who are out there and are basically picking it off as Mason enters the bay and then exits. And in a very Morrison like stance, he's still in his spacesuit and he's got the full bulletproof vest, the armor. He's got the guns, he has an assault rifle and a pistol, and he starts taking out anyone armed or anyone getting in his way as he gets to the bridge, which is where we find the commander and a couple of, his cronies, which the cronies and the bridge people all leave to where it's just the commander and Mason. And rightfully, Mason's kinda pissed at him. The cronies get in their suits and they start, fighting out, duking it with the other two. Neither of them, when a car gets badly damaged, but, cool thing with his fight, I'm going to go into it because I want to get more detail with Mason's in a minute. He aims both cannons down and just fires them straight through, creating an X in one of the goofs, just blowing him to shreds. But obviously his explosion damages a car a bit, sending him back and stuff. And just, Duff is just fighting it out, just shooting, gets into a sword fight with the other guy, takes some hits, he loses his shield, but he kills that guy, and it's back to, shooting, mowing down people out there. Because we're going to cut back to those fights while this one is kind of going on. And all that fun stuff. Well, rather than shooting him, because, he's gone through most of his ammo reserves and everything on his way to this place. And so he starts having a fist brawl, or Mason does, with the main, antagonist, the leader of the Crow Squadron. And it's going well. He's getting a couple blows in, couple left hooks, couple jabs. But then he starts really getting his ass handed to him and ends up on the ground, and we see the photo of Grandpappy Hart fall out of his vest and onto the ground, and the leader picks it up, laughs, and he says something along the lines of, "I see where you got your frailness from if you come from such a pathetic old man's bloodline." And obviously, if you know at this point, Mason loves that old man to death, and hearing him be insulted by a complete stranger sends him into a blind rage. And so he just begins just wailing and beating, and he eventually gets him to the ground. He's just punching his face and everything. He's coughing up blood. Kind of graphic. He half beats the man to death, but so where he doesn't move and everything like that. And then he gets up and walks away. And the dude just coughing asks, "What are you going to do? Finish the job? You know I'm going to keep coming back after everyone you've ever loved, everyone who's related to you. If you leave me alive, I'll hunt you down." And he said, "Don't worry about that. I've picked up a little trick from my friend." And he just walks up to the front window dashboard, places a block of C4 on it, and then just walks away, leaving the room. The dude's trying to crawl out of there as well. Mason just kind of kicks him in the ribs, keeps him down, leaves the door, and we just kind of see him, chuckling to himself as the C4 is detonated. He gets launched out into space, and then we see a fighter pilot, or a fighter jet, just fly by the window after that. And obviously with this, that parks in the hangar and grabs the big-ass goof. Obviously with this suit, we're not going to ever, see his face, because, the mask is painted over. He's kind of gone full nomad. He's got the poncho on him. But with this person, we can assume it to be Paul Morrison. Because names, there's so many of them. It's getting messed up in my head. But we see Mason get to the hangar, and we see a man get into the goof. Mason feels defeated because he's like, "Oh fuck, this guy's coming to, kill us and everything like that." And the goof turns over to Mason, just with its hand. We just see it scrape off, the paint and damage, that entire insignia that's on its front face. just look at him and then go out and join the other two in, holding the line and everything like that. And Mason's like, oh shit, this guy's here to help us and stuff like that. And so they go back and they're fighting. There's waves and waves of suits, less and less of which are now being shown having the Crow Squadron insignia and are now just standard Zaku suits. But we slowly pan out into a little montage where we see suits getting taken out and we see a car go down. We see like him just get shot and fall back into the like ship kind of thing, and his suit just exploding, taking out the remainder of the ship. We see Duff lose his gun. He starts going out and, fighting off the forces with his swords, but his suit gets so badly damaged that, he ejects out into the little COD fighter that was in the suit, his little fighter jet, and begins trying to take him out that way, but, that takes damage and everything and starts burning. We see the final two suits being the now scraped off insignia Goof and Morrison's old suit being piloted by Mason. And both of them are just rattling off in like back to back kind of thing. And they're just kind of sat there. And, they run out of ammo. It's fallen quiet. Just without turning back, Mason passes the shotgun to the Goof, who takes it, and the Heat Hawk activates. Mason has two swords, and then they just go out separately into the hordes and begin fighting them with the axe and the swords, just taking out suits left and right as it slowly fades away and explosions happen. And both of their fates are to be decided from that point as well. But as that happens, it cuts to Luna, and it's Tessa giving her remarks of the whole event and what they had, discussed. They're talking about, the ship, the fleeing, the field, all that stuff. And it's like, and what happened to these men? Oh, it was said that they'd gone on a suicide mission, but none of them returned. So it cannot be said whether or not it was successful or not. And she just hopes that at least they had found peace or solace in their mission, or some other, random bullshit you put onto a little government submission file. And it just turns to slowly look out into space, and it just kind of goes out and looks, and then cuts to credits. That's how it ends. And I know most of y'all are going to be like, what? That's not really a happy ending, and I'll prove you wrong, because it shows the character growth. Because with Akar, it shows his willingness to be a team player now, rather than him trying to stand out like he did in the beginning. He decides to fall in to line. He does what's right for the group rather than looking flashy. Same thing with Stukov. Rather than being more self-oriented, he decides to take the high road and self-sacrifices for both the betterment of the mission and the survival of his friends. Duff Kelly really wasn't a character that needed to grow, but with his character it showed that his morals and everything had evolved over time, and that he had come to terms with what his whole arc was following his character. And Mason went from a very shy, green, very spineless, a new soldier, to someone who had more grown into a spot of leadership or a man of his own values. And obviously with Paul, he had overcome most of his, goofy antics that he used to cloud his reality from everything, and finally did the right thing with both sacrifice and returning kind of thing. Most of these characters all had a round circle, and the entire point of this series is to fill in a gap for the central timeline that most of us really are unsure about. So that's why most of our main cast doesn't survive in the end, because this is a squadron no one remembers, both on the Federation and the Xeon side, because it was such a short brawl that ends this way, so it doesn't cloud any of the future series, and it closes off ambiguousness that was brought up in the past about certain things. So yeah, that is the ending of Gundam: A Forgotten Past. It's been over a year now of us recording this, and in my mind, it doesn't feel fitting for it, unfortunately, to end off in this story-tell way. This feels like more what I'm going to do over the coming month of creating the summary of the whole series, but this was written in agreement of all those who had participated, and everyone got the endings that they felt were deserving of their characters. And it helps tie up everything we've had going neatly. A nice little bow. So yeah, if you really enjoyed this, I appreciate it. We really don't have anything else for you to do besides, maybe hit a like button or something like that. And I'll be coming out with the summary video, I'm going to say shortly, but it's probably going to be like a month or two of work, because, I'm actually going to make it seem like a video. But, yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this series, and I'm looking forward to trying to continue it into actuality later. Thank you for listening. This has been Luke. Goodbye.